When Sarah Chen's routine DNA analysis flags a match to Staff Sergeant Marcus Ramirez, a Navy SEAL who died in a firefight in Afghanistan 8 years ago, she discovers that some secrets are buried so deep, even death can't hide them. But as she digs deeper into the impossible match, Sarah realizes the blood sample sitting in her lab might prove that Ramirez never died at all, and that someone very powerful wants to keep it that way. Sarah Chen had analyzed exactly 47832 blood samples in her 6 years at the Regional Forensic Laboratory. She knew this because she kept meticulous records, a habit born from her graduate studies at Johns Hopkins and reinforced by the tedious nature of her work. Most days blurred together in a symphony of centrifuges, pipettes, and the soft hum of the DNA sequencer that sat like a monolith in the corner of her workspace. Tuesday, March 14th, started like any other day. She arrived at 7:30 a.m., made her usual green tea in the break room, and began processing the backlog of samples from the weekend. Sample number A8B8C4 came from a routine blood drive at a community center in Silver Spring, Maryland. Nothing about it seemed remarkable. The automated analysis system ran through the night, comparing genetic markers against the National DNA Database, a standard protocol for all samples processed through their facility. When Sarah returned from her lunch break, she noticed the red notification blinking on her monitor. Match found, pulsed in bold letters across her screen, accompanied by a confidence rating of 99.97%. Her first thought was that someone in the blood drive had an outstanding warrant, perhaps for a minor offense. It happened occasionally, usually resolving into awkward phone calls with local police departments. But when she clicked through to view the match details, her breath caught in her throat. The name on the screen read, Staff Sergeant Marcus Ramirez, United States Navy. Date of birth, August 12, 1988. Status, KIA, killed in action. Helmand Province, Afghanistan, October 3, 2016. Sarah stared at the screen, her tea growing cold in her hands. The system had flagged a match to a dead man. Her first instinct was to assume a clerical error, perhaps a relative with similar genetic markers or a glitch in the database. She pulled up the full genetic profile, running it through the analysis again manually. The markers aligned perfectly. This wasn't a partial match or a familial connection. According to every test she could run, the blood sample sitting in her refrigerator belonged to Marcus Ramirez. She pulled up his military record, which was surprisingly sparse for someone with his rank. Navy SEAL, deployed 3 times to Afghanistan, twice to Iraq, recipient of the Bronze Star and Purple Heart. His service photograph showed a young man with intense dark eyes and the kind of lean, hardened face that came from seeing too much too soon. The KIA report was brief, almost perfunctory. Killed during a classified operation, remains recovered and returned to family, buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind racing through possibilities. DNA didn't lie. It couldn't lie. The genetic code was immutable, a biological fingerprint that survived death and decomposition. If this sample matched Marcus Ramirez, then either someone had made an extraordinary mistake in identifying his body 8 years ago, or something impossible had happened. She called her supervisor, Dr. Ellen Whitmore, who arrived at her desk within minutes, her reading glasses perched on her head and concern etched across her face. Ellen had been running the lab for 20 years and had seen every kind of anomaly imaginable. Together, they reviewed the analysis, running the sample through 2 additional sequencing protocols. Each time, the result came back identical. Ellen pulled up the chain of custody documentation for sample number A8B8C4. It had been collected on March the 10th at the Silver Spring Community Center by a registered phlebotomist named Jennifer Park. The donor had filled out a standard consent form providing a name, John Mitchell, and a birth date that would make him 32 years old. The signature was illegible, as most were. There was nothing remarkable about any of it. "This has to be a database error," Ellen said, though her voice carried uncertainty. "I'll contact the Military Records Division and have them verify their files." But Sarah couldn't shake the image of that service photograph from her mind. She opened a new browser window and searched for Marcus Ramirez, finding a handful of news articles from 2016. "Local hero killed in Afghanistan," read one headline from a Maryland newspaper. The article featured the same photograph from his service record, alongside quotes from his mother about his dedication to service and love of his country. There was a mention of his funeral, attended by dozens of fellow SEALs and hundreds of community members. His mother, Elena Ramirez, had received his flag. Everything pointed to a man who had died and been properly mourned. Yet here sat his blood, drawn 4 days ago from someone very much alive. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog, mechanically processing other samples while her mind circled around the impossibility of A8B8C4. When Ellen returned near the end of the day, her expression was grave. "I spoke with 3 different people at military records," she said quietly, glancing around the lab as if checking for eavesdroppers. They all confirmed the same information. Marcus Ramirez was killed in action in October 2016. His body was positively identified through dental records and DNA matching. He's buried at Arlington. She paused, her fingers drumming nervously on Sarah's desk. They also asked me a lot of questions about why we were inquiring, more questions than I would have expected. One of them took my name and employee ID number. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. "What are you saying?" Ellen met her eyes, and Sarah saw something there she'd never seen before. Fear. "I'm saying that maybe we should document what we found, seal the sample, and let this go. Sometimes there are explanations we're not meant to understand." But Sarah had built her career on understanding, on following evidence wherever it led. The scientific method didn't allow for willful ignorance, for turning away from data because it was inconvenient or frightening. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. She created a backup of all the analysis files, copying them to an encrypted drive she kept in her desk. Then she pulled sample A8B8C4 from the refrigerator and divided it into 3 separate vials, storing 2 of them in different locations within the lab's storage system. If someone came looking, she wanted insurance. She wanted proof that she wasn't crazy, that what she'd found was real. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her apartment in Bethesda, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the discovery. By 3 a.m., she had made another decision. She needed to find out who had donated that blood. The Silver Spring Community Center was a public facility, which meant they had security cameras. If she could identify John Mitchell, or whoever he really was, she might be able to understand how a dead Navy SEAL's genetic code ended up in a routine blood drive. The next morning, she called in sick for the first time in 2 years. Ellen texted her almost immediately. "Are you okay? Is this about yesterday?" Sarah replied that she had a migraine and would be back tomorrow. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her head pounded with questions that wouldn't quiet. The Silver Spring Community Center was a sprawling brick building that hosted everything from yoga classes to municipal meetings. Sarah arrived just after 9 a.m. when the administrative offices opened. She introduced herself to the receptionist as Dr. Chen from the Regional Forensic Laboratory and explained that she was following up on the blood drive from March 10th. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Donna, seemed happy to help. "Oh yes, that was a great turnout. We had over 100 donors. Is there a problem?" Sarah kept her voice casual. "Not at all. I just need to verify some information about one of the participants, a donor named John Mitchell. Would you have any record of him, or perhaps security footage from that day?" Donna's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Let me check our registration logs. We usually have people sign in even for the blood drive." After a moment, she frowned. "That's odd. I don't see a John Mitchell registered for that day. But the blood drive was open to walk-ins, so not everyone pre-registered." Sarah's heart raced. What about security footage? Would that still be available? Donna made a phone call to the facilities manager, and 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself in a small office watching grainy footage from the community center's cameras. The blood drive had been set up in the main gymnasium, and cameras covered the entrance, parking lot, and main hallways. She fast-forwarded through hours of footage, watching dozens of people enter and exit. Then, at 2:17 p.m., she saw him, or the man who entered through the main entrance was wearing a baseball cap pulled low and dark sunglasses despite the overcast day. He walked with the kind of deliberate, controlled movement Sarah had seen in military documentaries, economical, purposeful, aware of his surroundings. He was tall, perhaps 6'1" or 6'2", with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who maintained serious physical fitness. She couldn't see his face clearly, but something about his posture, the way he carried himself, matched the military bearing she imagined from Marcus Ramirez's service photograph. The man spent exactly 43 minutes inside the building, presumably in the gymnasium where the blood drive was taking place. When he emerged, he paused near the exit, turning slightly toward one of the cameras. For just a fraction of a second, his face was partially visible beneath the cap. Sarah's breath caught. She couldn't be certain, but the jawline, the shape of his face, it could be Ramirez, aged 8 years from his service photo. She asked Donna if she could get a copy of the footage, claiming it was for their records. Donna agreed, and Sarah left the community center with a USB drive in her purse and more questions than answers. If Marcus Ramirez was alive, why had he faked his death? Why would a Navy SEAL, a man who had served his country with distinction, orchestrate such an elaborate deception? And why, after 8 years of maintaining that deception, would he donate blood at a public blood drive where his genetic code would inevitably end up in a database? The more Sarah thought about it, the more deliberate it seemed. Someone who had successfully faked their death for 8 years would know better than to leave biological evidence in a government database. Unless that was exactly what he wanted. That afternoon, Sarah did something she knew was risky. She called Marcus Ramirez's mother. She found a phone number in one of the old obituaries and dialed before she could talk herself out of it. The phone rang 4 times before an older woman's voice answered, heavily accented with Spanish inflections. "Hello?" Sarah's mouth went dry. "Mrs. Ramirez, my name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm a researcher working on a project related to veterans' families, and I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about your son, Marcus." There was a long pause. When Elena Ramirez spoke again, her voice was thick with emotion. "My son died 8 years ago. What could you possibly want to know that would help anyone now?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "I'm studying the long-term impact of loss on military families. I wanted to understand who Marcus was, beyond the official records. What kind of person was he?" Elena was quiet for so long that Sarah thought she might have hung up. Then she began to speak, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. She talked about Marcus as a boy, how he had always been protective of his younger sister, how he excelled in school but chose the military over college because he wanted to serve. She talked about his deployments, how he would come home changed each time, quieter, more distant. "The last time I saw him alive was September 2016, Elena said. "He came home on leave for just 2 days. He seemed different, not in a bad way, but like he was carrying something heavy, some burden he couldn't share. He told me he loved me and Maria, his sister, more than anything. He said no matter what happened, we should remember that everything he did was to protect us." The phrasing struck Sarah as odd, no matter what happened, as if he had known something was coming. "Did he say anything else that seemed unusual?" Sarah asked. Elena hesitated. "There was one thing. The night before he left, he hugged me and whispered, 'Sometimes the only way to win is to disappear.' I thought he was being philosophical, talking about combat tactics or something, but after he died, those words haunted me. I never understood what he meant." Sarah felt the pieces beginning to align, though the picture they formed was still incomplete. "Mrs. Ramirez, did you see his body before the funeral?" Another long pause. "No. The casket was closed. They told us he had been badly injured in the explosion. I received his personal effects, his dog tags, some letters. The Navy sent representatives to the funeral. Everything seemed official, proper. Why are you asking me these things?" Sarah made a decision in that moment, one that would either make her sound insane or open a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. "Mrs. Ramirez, I have reason to believe your son might still be alive." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Finally, Elena spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't do this to me. Don't give me hope where there is none. I buried my son. I visit his grave." Sarah pressed on, knowing she was causing pain but unable to stop now. "I can't explain everything over the phone, but I've found evidence, scientific evidence, that suggests Marcus might have faked his death. I know how this sounds, but I need you to trust me. Has anything strange happened recently? Anyone contacted you asking questions about Marcus?" Elena's breathing grew rapid on the other end. "Last week," she said slowly, "a man came to my door. He said he was from the VA, checking on families of fallen soldiers. But something felt wrong about him. He asked too many questions about whether Marcus had any friends who still contacted us, whether we had kept anything from his deployments. I told him we hadn't heard from anyone, which was true. He left, but I saw him sitting in a car down the street for hours afterward." Sarah felt ice run through her veins. Someone else was looking for Marcus Ramirez, or at least looking for evidence of him. And if they were watching his family, they might soon be watching anyone asking questions about him. "Mrs. Ramirez, I need you to do something for me. Don't tell anyone about this conversation. If anyone else comes asking questions, call me immediately." She gave Elena her cell phone number. "And please, be careful." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her car outside the community center, hands shaking. She had crossed a line, involved a grieving mother in what was increasingly looking like something dangerous. But the alternative was to pretend she hadn't found what she'd found, to seal up sample A8B8C4 and forget about the impossible match. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ellen. "We need to talk. Not at the lab. Meet me at the Starbucks on Wisconsin Ave in an hour." The message was uncharacteristically cryptic, and Sarah's sense of unease deepened. She drove to the coffee shop, arriving early, choosing a table in the back corner where she could watch the entrance. Ellen arrived exactly on time, looking over her shoulder as she entered. She ordered a coffee she didn't drink and sat down across from Sarah, her face drawn with stress. "Someone came to the lab this morning," Ellen said without preamble. "Two men in suits. They said they were from the Department of Defense, investigating a potential security breach. They wanted all our records related to sample A8B8C4, and they had authorization to seize it." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her. "Did you give it to them?" Ellen shook her head. "I told them I needed to verify their credentials first, that I couldn't hand over evidence without proper documentation. They weren't happy, but they agreed to return tomorrow with a court order. Sarah, what have you stumbled into?" Sarah's mind raced. She had less than 24 hours before the evidence disappeared, before whatever truth sample A8B8C4 held was buried under official channels and government authority. "I made backup copies," she admitted, "of the analysis and the sample itself. I stored them separately." Ellen closed her eyes. "Of course you did. Sarah, listen to me carefully. I've been in this business long enough to recognize when something is above my pay grade. Whatever this is, it involves people with serious resources and serious authority. You need to decide right now if you're willing to risk everything to pursue this." The question hung in the air between them. Sarah thought about her career, her reputation, the comfortable life she had built through years of cautious decisions and careful adherence to protocol. Then she thought about Marcus Ramirez, about a Navy SEAL who had died, or appeared to die, on a classified operation, about a mother who had buried an empty casket and a sister who had lost her protector. She thought about the deliberateness of that blood donation, the message it seemed to carry. "I'm here. Find me." "I have to know the truth," Sarah said finally. "I have to understand why his DNA showed up in a random blood drive. He wanted to be found, Ellen. Why else would he leave such an obvious trail?" Ellen sighed deeply, pulling a manila folder from her bag. "I did some digging of my own, called in some favors with colleagues who work in military medicine. Marcus Ramirez's operation, the one where he supposedly died, It was part of something called Operation Phantom Strike. Highly classified, multi-agency involvement. I couldn't get details, but my contact said it involved deep cover operatives and had something to do with intercepting weapons trafficking to insurgent groups. Sarah opened the folder to find printed documents, heavily redacted, showing glimpses of operation details. What wasn't blacked out painted a picture of a complex infiltration operation, one that required operatives to embed themselves in criminal networks for extended periods. "What if he didn't fake his death to escape?" Sarah said slowly, the pieces finally clicking together. "What if it was part of the mission? What if becoming a ghost was the only way to go deep enough?" Ellen nodded. "That's what I wondered. But if that's the case, why surface now? Why donate blood in a public setting where his genetic code would trigger every alarm in the system?" Sarah remembered Elena's words. Sometimes the only way to win is to disappear. And then she understood. He's trying to come back. After 8 years undercover, something's changed. He needs to surface, but he can't just knock on the DoD's door. He needs leverage, proof that he's who he says he is. The blood sample is his way of announcing himself, of creating a verifiable record that he's alive. "But why not just contact his handlers directly?" Ellen asked. Sarah thought about the men who had come to the lab, about the person watching Elena Ramirez's house. Because maybe he can't trust his handlers anymore. Maybe whatever he discovered in 8 years undercover is something someone in the government doesn't want revealed. He needed a neutral third party, us, to verify his identity independently of military channels. The implications were staggering. If Sarah was right, Marcus Ramirez was a deep cover operative who had spent 8 years infiltrating terrorist networks or criminal organizations, and he was now trying to exfiltrate himself from a situation that had somehow gone wrong. The blood sample was a beacon, a signal to anyone paying attention that a ghost was trying to come home. Sarah made her decision. "I'm going back to the community center. If Ramirez wanted to make contact, he would have planned for someone to follow the trail. There might be something else there, something I missed." Ellen grabbed her wrist. "Sarah, if you're right about any of this, you're putting yourself in serious danger. These aren't the kind of people who appreciate civilians getting involved in classified operations." Sarah met her eyes steadily. "Then help me. You have contacts, resources I don't. If we're going to do this, we need to move fast before those men come back with their court order." Ellen was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "There's a journalist I know, someone who specializes in national security issues. If this goes wrong, if something happens to us, we need someone who can get the truth out. Let me make a call." Over the next 6 hours, Sarah and Ellen worked with a precision born of urgency. They copied every file related to sample A8B8C4 onto multiple drives, encrypting them and distributing them to trusted colleagues across the country. Ellen contacted her journalist friend, a woman named Rebecca Torres, who had broken several stories about Black Ops programs gone wrong. Rebecca agreed to meet them that evening at a secure location. Meanwhile, Sarah returned to the Silver Spring Community Center, this time with a specific purpose. She had reviewed the security footage again and again, watching the man she believed to be Ramirez. When he had exited the building, he had paused near a bulletin board in the entrance hallway, appearing to read the notices posted there. It had seemed like a casual gesture, but nothing about this man was casual. Sarah examined the bulletin board carefully, looking at the dozens of flyers advertising everything from guitar lessons to apartment rentals. Then she saw it. A small index card, pushed up in the corner, easy to overlook. Written in neat block letters was a phone number and 3 words: for Jay Mitchell. The name from the blood drive consent form. Sarah photographed the card with her phone and immediately called the number from a burner phone Ellen had insisted she purchase. It rang twice before someone answered. The voice that spoke was male, low and controlled. I wondered if anyone would call. Sarah's heart hammered. "Is this Marcus Ramirez?" A pause. "That's a name from another life. Are you the lab tech who found the match?" "Dr. Sarah Chen. Yes, I found your sample." Then you know I'm supposed to be dead. I know you were declared KIA in 2016. I know you were buried at Arlington. And I know you donated blood 4 days ago in Silver Spring using a false name. Another pause, longer this time. I need your help, Dr. Chen. But first, I need to know if you've told anyone official about the match. Sarah made a split-second decision to trust him. The DoD is coming to seize the sample tomorrow. I have backups, but I don't know how long I can hold them off. She heard what sounded like relief in his exhalation. Good. That's good. Listen carefully. I've been undercover for 8 years in an operation that was supposed to last 18 months. I infiltrated a weapons trafficking network that's being protected by someone inside the US government. I have evidence, names, transactions, proof of treason, but everyone who was supposed to be my lifeline is either dead or compromised. I needed a way to verify my identity to the right people without alerting the wrong ones. Why me? Why a blood test? Because DNA doesn't lie, and because civilian databases are separate from military ones. If I had walked into a government facility, I would have been disappeared before I could tell my story. But if a civilian scientist discovered my genetic code in a routine screening, if that discovery spread to enough people before it could be contained, then I have leverage. I have witnesses who can verify I'm alive. Sarah felt the weight of what he was saying settle over her. You used me as insurance. I used you as truth, Ramirez corrected. You're a scientist. You deal in verifiable facts. That's exactly what I need right now. What do you want me to do? Meet me tomorrow before the DoD comes for the sample. Bring the journalist your colleague contacted. Yes, I know about that. I've been watching to make sure you weren't being followed. I have documentation that needs to reach the right people at the Department of Justice, people who aren't part of the conspiracy I uncovered. But I need your analysis, your scientific proof that I am who I say I am, to give credibility to my evidence. Sarah's mind whirled. If you have evidence of treason, why not just go to the FBI directly? Because the network I infiltrated includes FBI agents. It includes people in the DoD, in private military contractors, in congressional oversight committees. The only way this works is if the evidence goes public simultaneously with verification of my identity, so it can't be buried or discredited. They arranged to meet the next morning at a location Ramirez specified, a public park in Arlington, across the river from the cemetery where his empty casket was buried. Sarah hung up and immediately called Ellen, who was already with Rebecca Torres. They agreed to meet at Sarah's apartment to plan their next moves. That night, the 3 women sat around Sarah's kitchen table, reviewing everything they knew. Rebecca, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with graying hair and an intense focus, listened to the whole story without interrupting. When Sarah finished, Rebecca sat back and whistled low. If even half of this is true, we're looking at one of the biggest national security stories in a decade. A deep-cover operative who discovered a treason network, faked his death or had it faked for him, spent 8 years gathering evidence and is now trying to surface. This is Pulitzer material. It's also incredibly dangerous. Can you protect us? Ellen asked. If we go public with this? Rebecca nodded slowly. I have contacts at the Justice Department, people I trust. And I work for a news organization that has lawyers and resources to back up stories like this. But you need to understand, once we start this, there's no going back. People with power and resources will try to discredit you, investigate your lives, possibly threaten you. Are you sure you're ready for that? Sarah thought about Marcus Ramirez, about 8 years of living in the shadows, about a mother who had grieved for a son who was still alive. She thought about the principle that had guided her entire career. That truth, empirical and verifiable truth, mattered more than comfort or convenience. I'm sure, she said. Ellen nodded her agreement. The next morning, March 16th, dawned cold and clear. Sarah arrived at the park in Arlington at 7 a.m., carrying a locked briefcase containing copies of all her analysis, the genetic profiles, the chain of custody documentation. Ellen and Rebecca arrived separately, taking positions where they could observe the meeting without being obvious. At exactly 7:15, a man approached Sarah's bench. He was tall, lean, with the same dark eyes from the service photograph but aged by 8 years of hard living. He wore civilian clothes, jeans and a dark jacket, but moved with unmistakable military bearing. "Dr. Chen," he said, extending his hand. "Marcus Ramirez. Thank you for being brave enough to follow the evidence." Sarah shook his hand, feeling the calluses of someone who had worked with weapons and lived rough. "I need to understand something. If your death was part of the operation, if the government faked your KIA to send you deep cover, why do you need to surface this way? Why can't you just contact your superiors?" Ramirez's face hardened. "Because my mission commander, the only person who knew my true status, was killed in a car accident 6 months ago. Officially, it was ruled an accident. Unofficially, I know it was murder because I was watching his movements. He was about to blow the whistle on the same network I was investigating. With him gone, I became a liability, a ghost operative with no official oversight and no paper trail to prove I was ever sanctioned. If I had surfaced through normal channels, I would have been eliminated as a rogue agent. I needed independent verification of my identity before I could safely bring my evidence forward." He opened his own briefcase, pulling out thick folders of documents, photographs, financial records. "This is everything. Names of government officials taking bribes from arms dealers. Proof that weapons sold to our allies were being deliberately diverted to terrorist groups, with the profits funneled back to people in Washington. I have recordings, bank transfers, photographs of meetings that were supposed to never exist. But without proof that I am who I say I am, this is just paper that can be dismissed or destroyed." Sarah handed him her briefcase. "You have your proof. Genetic analysis that's been independently verified by multiple scientists. A chain of custody that's been documented and distributed. You're not a ghost anymore, Mr. Ramirez. You're flesh and blood, and there's scientific evidence to prove it." Ramirez took the briefcase, and for the first time, Sarah saw something like relief cross his face. "My mother," he said quietly. "Is she okay? I wanted to contact her so many times, but—" "She's okay," Sarah assured him. "She's strong, and she never stopped believing in you, even when she thought you were dead." Rebecca Torres approached then, introducing herself and explaining that her news organization was prepared to break the story within hours, coordinating with Justice Department investigators who were standing by. The documentation Ramirez provided, combined with the scientific proof of his identity, would be released simultaneously to prevent suppression. By noon that day, the story exploded across every news outlet in the country. "Navy SEAL declared dead in 2016 surfaces with evidence of government corruption," read the headlines. Sarah found herself thrust into a whirlwind of media attention, congressional hearings, and investigations. The men who had come to seize sample A8B8C4 turned out to be private contractors hired by one of the conspirators, not actual DoD officials. The real Department of Defense, once informed of the situation through proper channels, immediately placed Ramirez in protective custody and launched a full investigation into the network he had exposed. 3 months later, Sarah sat in a coffee shop across from Marcus Ramirez, who was preparing to testify before a congressional committee. He had been reunited with his mother and sister, who had both cried for hours upon seeing him alive. The investigation he had triggered was still unfolding, with arrests being made almost weekly. "I still don't understand one thing," Sarah said. "Of all the ways you could have surfaced, why a blood drive? Why leave it to chance that someone would notice the match?" Ramirez smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "It wasn't chance, Dr. Chen. I researched forensic labs in the region and found yours. I read your published papers on genetic analysis protocols. I knew that if anyone would notice an impossible match and have the integrity to investigate it rather than dismiss it, it would be you. I was counting on your scientific curiosity being stronger than the instinct to look away from uncomfortable truths." Sarah realized she had been tested, and somehow, against all odds and in the face of considerable pressure, she had passed. "What will you do now?" she asked. "Testify. Help bring down the people who corrupted an important mission and killed good operatives who were trying to do the right thing. And then, maybe, try to be Marcus Ramirez again instead of the dozen other identities I've worn for 8 years. He paused. And I'll visit my mother every week. I've got a lot of lost time to make up for. As Sarah walked back to her lab that afternoon, she thought about the 47832 samples she had processed and the one that had changed everything. Science, she had always believed, was about uncovering truth regardless of where it led. Sometimes that truth was simple, a match in a database, a pattern in genetic code. And sometimes that truth opened doors to worlds of conspiracy, courage, and the remarkable resilience of people who refused to let evil hide in the shadows. Sample numbered A8B8C4 would go down in forensic history, a textbook example of how a single piece of evidence, properly analyzed and bravely pursued, could unravel even the most carefully constructed deceptions. But for Sarah, it would always be something more, a reminder that the truth is worth fighting for, even when that fight leads you into dangers you never imagined.